Welcome back to another conversation about Ireland's future in conversation with series as part of the Dubai Irish Society, and of course about a grander scale of the Irish abroad. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome another Derryman back to the series, a Professor of Human Rights in the School of Law, Queen's University Belfast, Fellow of Senator of George J. Mitchell Institute, and Board Member of Ireland's Future. And I believe he's coming to us from Belfast in the north of Ireland. Please welcome Professor Colin Harvey.
Thank you very much, Billy. Really delighted to be here. Yeah, I'm speaking to you from the law school here at Queen's, so the main site tower.
Well, Colin, thank you so much for doing this. We've had three former political leaders have our conversations about Ireland's future, but it's great for you to be our first guest from a non-political or non-party side.
Yeah. No, it's one of the important parts of the discussion has been to, I suppose, two things. One is the amount of work being done by universities and various research projects to sort of build an evidence base around all of this, and there's some great work ongoing, but also in addition to academic work, the civil society efforts that are ongoing. You know, I've been involved, as you know, as you mentioned, in Ireland's Future, but also groups like the Constitutional Conversations group, just to try and promote a civic dialogue as well, because, you know, that's really important part of this too.
Had a wee brief introduction, and we had kind of maybe a year's long worth of passing emails about the topic of Ireland's future, especially regarding a border pool and constitutional change. As we did have former political leaders on board, it would be great to get your insight to dissect and simplify what I believe and what a lot of people believe needs.
In some ways, Billy, it really is. Although, you know, the North is a complicated place, at the heart of this, it is quite simple in many ways. People here have a choice about the constitutional future. That's there in the Good Friday Agreement promises that have been made. And you know, people talk about the principle of consent and all of that. Ultimately, the future will be determined by choice. So people here have a choice. So at the core of this is a very simple proposition. People have a choice between the union with Britain or a united Ireland. Those are the options. It's hardly surprising that people would like to exercise that choice. You know, so don't really just want it talked about in the abstract. You know, I would like in my lifetime, to use that famous phrase that many people use, to be given the choice. And what do we want to do? Really, we want to know what we're voting for in that, in those referendums that will be coming. I, of course, I'm very open about the view I have on that, but nobody wants to go into this unprepared. So there's been a lot of focus on planning and preparing, sort of repetitive references to that, but that's really about just getting it right. So ultimately, I do think it is, yes, complicated. It's a post-conflict society, and you have to be sensitive to that. You have to be aware that there are people who will oppose constitutional change quite strenuously, but at its core, it is really about a choice.
Even going into, I'm very with you, but whenever we do these things, we have our conversations mainly about the Irish abroad, here in Dubai, or the United Arab Emirates, the Middle East, the GCC region, or the MENA region, which is the Middle East and North Africa. They're still asking the question of, what does that mean for me? So the first question I would have is, how do you envision Ireland's constitutional future evolving in the coming decades, and what role will its citizens play in shaping it?
Yeah, like it's a good question. I suppose I would respond to that in two ways, really. One response is that what's really commendable and notable about the discussion so far is how much of a focus there is on civic participation engagement. So people, you and I, everybody being part of a wider conversation. And if you look at the proposals from the political parties, they put civic participation, a citizens' assembly is a forum at the heart of what they're discussing. So ultimately, it will mean you know, you and I, everybody playing our part in that wider conversation and that wider discussion. And I think that's really, really important aspect of it. So really it'll be an ask of people to join in the discussion about that. But you also mentioned constitutional future. You know, that'll be framed by the Good Friday Agreement for now. But one of the things that we'll need to discuss as part of that is, you know, do you want a new constitution in a United Ireland? It's been interesting to see the number of people who have put new constitutional arrangements at the heart and center of their suggestions as well. So, you know, ultimately it's an ask. You know, what will it mean for people? I mean, participating, joining in the discussion. What would you like to see for the future? But that's also the exciting part of that is, you know, thinking about what a United Ireland would look like, and, you know, do we need a new constitution for a United Ireland? So I think it's people joining in, being part of the discussion, whether they're on the island of Ireland or whether it's people all over the world. You know, one of the great things about Ireland is, you know, people use the phrase global Ireland. Well, there genuinely is a global Ireland. So it's about global Ireland playing its part in shaping the future of the island. Yeah.
You're no stranger to conversing about Ireland's future. You said in a past conversation that I went to Belfast, you were aiming for around 2030, and it seems like when it goes into manifestos, 2030 seems to be this magical date that we're setting for a referendum. How close? I'm sorry. Now that you said we're going into 2025, Ireland's future started its purpose in 2010. You proposed it like a football match. We're only halfway in. It's time. We're still having 45 minutes to play.
Yeah.
How likely are we to be within that referendum at 2030?
Well, I suppose probably the first thing is that a lot of the evidence, you know, the work of academics like Professor Brendan O'Leary and others are pointing to sort of early 2030s as a key moment. So a lot of the evidence around demographic change, you know, political developments that have been happening in the north and on the island suggest that, you know, it makes sense to get ready for that. I'm somebody who believes in a time frame. So I think the time frame is helpful and helps to focus minds. And ultimately, we're halfway through. If you want to take the decade so we're heading into 2025, halfway through. I suppose phase one of that has been about mainstreaming the discussion. So in a sense, what we're doing now, but people being aware that this is a discussion that's happening all over the island and beyond. And I think that's largely been achieved. You know, it's really remarkable to me to watch the way this has now become a central conversation. But I think the next phase is moving into a more concrete phase, if you like, of at some point, those advocating a United Ireland are going to have to put their proposals on the table. It's going to have to be like Ireland's future document talks about a program for a new Ireland, or people refer to a prospectus or something like that, you know, something that will be like a manifesto. So I think the next phase of this sort of overall project is moving into that territory, based on, you know, rigorous, objective evidence, academic research. So that's also then about, I think, building up a coalition, political coalition, civil society of people who will ultimately all have to be campaigning together in one way or other about getting that outcome. I think how likely it is by 2030, well, I think the important thing at the moment is just to get the preparatory work done. You know, there's been a lot of focus on the Irish government to step into this space. There's been talk about creating a department, a ministry, about a green paper. I think all of those ideas, in addition to the Citizens' Assembly proposals, they all make very good sense to me to make sure that things are ready. So I've never seen the discussion as focused and detailed as it is now. Obviously, there's much more work to be done, but it's at least plausible in my mind, whether that's 2030 or in the early 2030s, that we'll be we'll be at a stage where it becomes increasingly difficult for the British government to refuse to hold a referendum here, which is another aspect of the discussion. You know.
All right. Well, when we have these conversations over here, not a key point whenever we have ministerial visits. We've had Leo Varadkar, Simon Coveney, we've had Micheál Martin all here November last year.
Yeah.
And the conversation has never arisen in the Middle East about let's all meet up and talk about Ireland's future in terms of a referendum, constitutional change. So in order for those people to be either convinced, involved, or make up their mind, I go back to the question again, what key social and economic challenges do you see for Irish citizens?
The first thing I would say in relation to that is it's been noticeable that if you think about Ireland's future as an organisation, Ireland's future has held a range of meetings with political parties. Last year, 11 political parties in the Oireachtas around the table looking at the proposals that Ireland's future was advancing at the time, which led to the document that was produced in 2024. It was also interesting to note that Leo Varadkar spoke at the SSE Arena event in June. It was really very, very noticeable that he used he's been using different language around this as a political objective. So I would say there's a growing recognition among political parties here, evidenced in the manifestos in the Irish general election. I was looking through the various manifestos, and you can see to different degrees, obviously in different manifestos, there's clearly an awareness that this does need to be addressed. So that would be the first point. I think there's a growing acceptance across Irish political and civic life that this is a looming discussion. But you're right in a way, because the Irish government particularly has been so cautious about moving into this space, or at times almost avoiding talking about it, plus without structures being set up to facilitate the discussion, I think to many people, it can still seem rather abstract. I think people need those structures to be set up. Like we do need some form of all-Ireland civic forum. We do need the Irish government to take the debate and the preparatory work seriously, because while there's a lot of work going on in universities, again, that can seem a bit removed from the day-to-day life of people. But what you're really asking is people want to know, what will this mean for me? What will this mean for healthcare? What will this mean for employment? What will this mean for my children's future? And I think that's where the next phase of this, moving into very detailed proposals around it, that also helps to focus minds. I do believe, however, that without a time frame and without that level of focus, yourself, Billy, people have their lives to be getting on with, you know what I mean? So at times this can seem removed from everyday life. I think so there's a job of work to be done in pushing back against that. I think ultimately because what's clear from the emerging evidence is that, and the work that's been done, is the number of myths on the island about what's happening on the island now, and also the sense that a new Ireland, a new and united Ireland within the European Union, bringing the whole island under that umbrella, if you like, creates massive opportunities, and the sense that people will be better off. They'll be living in a fairer society if they opt for change. I think you're right. Raising awareness beyond the island of Ireland as well, to the global Irish community, that this debate is happening, and also to spelling out in more precise terms what it means for education, for healthcare, for employment, for day-to-day life. When people say you'll be better off, there's evidence already about life expectancy, about how well the South is doing, but I think it's spelling out in concrete terms what that actually means. There's a lot of this talk at the moment about the British government spelling out the criteria for a border poll and all of that. The difficulty there is, if the Irish government is not pressing the issue, is the British government really going to take it seriously if the Irish government is refusing to do that? Now, that's in no way to underestimate the importance of the shared island work and all the funding and other initiatives that are ongoing. But yourself, there's a real sense that a bit that the Irish government is sort of holding back. And people see that and they notice that. And I think that's a bit of a problem.
We just heard, and for people who are watching this, they enjoyed the simplified terms that we're trying to put in place from the likes of yourself. Colin Eastwood, the New Ireland Commission, SDLP, just put out a statement either yesterday, and it just obviously went viral, that in order for this to happen, the North has to see why joining the South makes so much sense in infrastructure, health, and whatever. And South has to see why the North brings so much. So, in short possible answers from you, I'll ask you from both sides. Let's play the Northern Ireland or the North of Ireland card first. If we have a border poll in 5 years, as a citizen from the North of Ireland or Northern Ireland, what does it mean for me in the referendum in education?
Well, I think, first of all, in relation to the North, once we get into a serious campaign where there are proposals on the table, I think a very strong case can be made. I think it won't be news to anybody watching this that the situation here at the moment is not good across a whole range of areas. Basic social and economic issues. The North is, to be candid, failing as a society. There's a level of dysfunction here that wouldn't be put up with in many other parts of these islands, or more generally. So I think that's not a difficult case. The question, so if you take education or you take any area like healthcare, I'm not a believer in simply cutting and pasting what's there now onto the North. So what it allows us to do is have a serious conversation about the advantages and disadvantages of the systems that are there at the moment. And I would certainly not be entering that discussion by saying, everything that exists in the South now should simply be applied in the North. I think whether you're talking about education or the health systems, we should be thinking about what's good on the island now, what works well, that could be incorporated into an all-island system. I suppose education in particular is one area where there's a real need for a serious conversation of moving away from the current system. You know yourself, there's aspects of the education system in the North that's disastrous, particularly for some of the most marginalized and disadvantaged people here. So I think that's an opportunity for a serious conversation. But again, that's where moving into a space where we're beginning to think about what the proposition is, Billy, So exactly your point. When you knock on somebody's door to campaign in a referendum, what are you proposing on the education system? And I'm really on the side of those who see this as an opportunity to take the language of a new Ireland seriously, and to think about how we build a model or an education system, for example, that's world leading, that gives us an opportunity to do what's done well now, but move away and abandon those things that aren't working.
Of Ireland, you're telling me to join the South of Ireland referendum because you Ireland. What does it mean for me in housing, education, and healthcare?
I think that's one of the problems. At the moment, we don't know the answer to that, Billy, right? That's why there's the focus on a government department, a unit, citizen assembly, and all of that. We don't have a manifesto for a united Ireland, and I'm certainly not somebody who would be entering that discussion and saying, the South's just going to absorb the North, and what happens in the South now will apply in the North, because I don't think that's a very good answer. That's one of the difficulties, right? The government who will deliver this ultimately is not on the pitch. There is no minister for reunification. There is no department for reunification. There hasn't been a citizens' assembly set up. What's happening is civil society groups like Ireland's Future, others can make suggestions, right? I can make a suggestion this afternoon for you, Billy, that's a utopian vision of what a new Ireland looks like. But is it deliverable? And it's not my gift to deliver it. It's exactly your point. When we do talk to people in conversations like this and they ask that question, we can give them an answer. I don't think the answer to that at the moment is, we'll just take the South. We'll just take the education system in the South or the health system, and we'll just put it in the North. I don't think that's a very convincing answer. Without those propositions, without that prospectus, without that manifesto, I think that becomes a very difficult conversation.
Everybody from the North is saying healthcare is broken, our education system is broken, infrastructure and roads are broken. Because of Brexit, it's broken. I'm in the South now. I'm in the heart of Ireland. I'm in Dublin, and you're trying to convince me of all those flaws. Why should I vote yes to absorb Ireland?
And this is where there has been
the same request.
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is, Billy, for this reason. I think what has happened on the island is, in many ways, partition has worked, right? The island is very, very siloed.
Yeah.
There are two jurisdictions on the island that have grown up separately, right? Despite all the work around sharing, around all island cooperation, there's two very different jurisdictions. Given this, I've been involved in done events in the south, and I've used this language of a new Ireland, and people will quietly come up to you afterwards and say, well, hold on a minute, Professor Harvey, we actually like the state that we have here. We like what we've achieved. So I think that those campaigning for United Ireland will need to factor that into their campaigning and their messaging and the evidence they present. So selling the advantages of a new and united Ireland to the south will be a challenging ask, even though, as you know, Billy, all the evidence at the moment, all the polling evidence suggests that the south would vote for United Ireland tomorrow. But one of the interesting things about the polling is that once you get into the detail of what it might involve, there's a bit more caution evident there. So there's going to have to be a job done around that. Like, my ultimate sense of that is that it will be to the advantage of everyone on the island to have a serious conversation about a new and united Ireland, because partition is bad for everyone. Having one part of the island essentially at the moment outside of the European Union for a start. The border on the island may seem invisible to many people, but it remains quite a hard border in other respects, including a hard immigration border. I think there are advantages to having the whole island of Ireland as an integrated space, aligned and integrated space within that broader European Union framework, and the advantages that will flow from that. Also, I think the propositions and proposals around the new Ireland will create opportunities for people who've maybe been left behind as well. But you're absolutely spot on. I think if people don't think seriously about the different arguments, the different propositions that will need to be brought to the table, and essentially referendums that will happen in two different jurisdictions, the north south, then it's going to have to be thought through. But that point as well, partition in many ways has worked to silo the island. To some extent evident in that election that's just happened in the south, who are, rather content with the status quo.
Whenever we had the opportunity to chat to Gerry Adams, he was very much involved in the Irish diaspora abroad and the huge influence that it's brought to the island, north and south, since partition. Still people of birth who are citizens who are unable to even vote for presidency.
Yeah.
However, there's nothing stopping us coming back for a referendum vote.
Yeah.
Making sure that we're eligible to vote and execute. Yeah. So what role, whenever it gets to this point, and it will get to this point, but what role does the Irish diaspora play in shaping Ireland's future? Yeah. Especially if we're asking for their vote. We're asking for the island of Ireland's vote, but those citizens abroad are freely able and likely to come back, register to vote once more time, and vote for a referendum. What role do you see the diaspora abroad playing?
A starting point in responding to that is really that one of the neglected aspects of the discussion is that this will be a global good news story, right? Yeah. When this happens, this will be widely and warmly welcomed around the world. And my sense is that is neglected in the discussion so far. And I don't just mean, that people will be happy that it's happening. I think there'll be a lot of tangible support from beyond Ireland for this outcome. Irish citizens around the world, but actually not only Irish citizens, it will be widely welcomed. People will be dancing in the street. It'll be seen as a hopeful thing in a world that badly needs a bit of hope at the minute. So I think that's important. But obviously, Irish citizens all over the world are absolutely crucial and central to building up and assisting and supporting and shaping all of this. And you're right, that too often that side of it can be neglected as well. Part of that's to do with the voting rules in Ireland and who can and can't vote, as you rightly point out, around presidential voting. So But no, Irish citizens all over the world are central. Also, to in a sort of hard political way as well, because at some point, my sense is, the Irish government could do with a bit of a nudge, right? So when you talk about Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar being there with you, it does no harm if somebody in the audience is asking the question, what are you doing about this? If there's an expectation building from Irish people all around the world, look, this is likely to happen. What are you doing to get ready for it? So actually putting a bit of pressure on the Irish government to up their game in this. And then also, I think, in relation to the British government, that the British government feel under a bit of pressure from around the world, from Irish communities around the world, is what are you doing around this? And I suppose thinking about the current Labour government in London and just the influence of the Irish community in Britain, for example, but all around the world on the Labour Party and Labour movements, to try to put a bit of pressure on them, to nudge them towards this question. I think even a small thing like just putting your hand up and asking the question, can make a huge difference if people encounter these politicians as to what they're doing. Because bear in mind that the issue of just preparing and planning sensibly for this outcome just makes perfect sense. They're not raising anything that a politician should be unable to answer, because that's the job of governments, to do this work in advance.
We need to be in a position right now where we were described as an actual diaspora here in the MENA region, or the Middle East, at least for us, where there was never a diaspora predominantly ever. It was North America, Great Britain, Australia even came up, and then that was it. That's what the Irish were going for. But now the MENA region has 12,500 Irish passports registered here, unable to get that number in Northern Irish passports, those who identify as Irish. And then we also have Qatar, Kuwait, and Saudi. Without presidential voting rights, what can we do? What can we do now, other than if a minister comes and we put our hand up and ask a question? Gary Adams simply said, write a letter to Joe Biden, or write a letter to the Taoiseach. And the question, is it as simple as that for the Irish diaspora abroad?
I think those are all brilliant suggestions, in terms of writing, and never underestimate the power of doing something like that. But I suppose an additional thing is, just back to your earlier question, if you think about some of the civic groups that have emerged in recent years, they're essentially just groups of concerned individuals who gathered together and formed groups to try and promote this discussion. So in answer to your earlier question, why not create versions of civic groups all over the world that are not just asking the question, but are actually saying, well, this is what we would like to see in United Ireland. This is the sort of healthcare we would like to be in place. This is the sort of education system, to have those conversations. So that takes it almost one step beyond asking a minister or writing to the government, to saying, well, these are, so when that citizens assembly is created, when those civic structures are in place, you're able to send your proposals in to those consultations and discussions. If the Irish government ever does produce a green paper, that then you have proposals to put on the table. Because I'm a big believer in, let's get as many ideas in there into this discussion as possible. So asking the question, but also saying, here's what I want to see. And so many people as well, Irish people around the world, would also like to come home at some stage, and so what sort of Ireland would people like to come home to? And perhaps some of the reasons why people aren't in Ireland right now as well.
Dubai in the Middle East has had a significant influx in educators and teachers. Obviously, you're coming from the north of Ireland, and you have a fair idea more than anyone about this. We've tried to get in touch with Minister Foley from the south. We've tried to get in touch with Minister Given in the north. And we failed miserably trying to get a response on a conversation like this about our educators and teachers. What does a referendum look like for them?
Well, I think, first of all, one of the things we do need to raise awareness about, which, and this is going to seem really, really odd, right, Billy, at this stage, is what's in the Good Friday Agreement. or the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, whatever you want to call it, because everyone around the world lauds this agreement, right? You know, we had a big event at Queen's for the 25th anniversary, and people came from all over the world to celebrate this agreement. So a starting point in terms of what it means for people is to walk people through the agreement. And I know that will sound like a remarkable thing to say, but the discussion we're having is at the absolute center of our peace agreement, our political agreement that frames everything else. Sometimes when you're dealing with politicians or governments, you would think that wasn't the case. You know, like let's be candid. In recent times in the North, when the reaction to raising this discussion has been really surprising, because on the one hand, people will come here and go, the Good Friday Agreement, peace in our time, and all of that. And then you will say, well, you know, it gives us a choice about this, and we want to talk about that, and people are less keen. And in the worst case scenario, they label it as divisive or unhelpful, things like that. So I think a starting point is that this is a promise that has been made to people here. And that's important in the education space, because making sure that not just those responsible for education, but the children in our schools and people understand that this should be a normal part of the conversation on the island of Ireland. So I think that's a job of work to be done. It may sound basic and it may sound really, really simplistic to say it, but just reminding people this is part of the promise that was made to people here, that one day we would eventually be given this choice, and that we'd like to do it in an informed way. We'd like to know what we're voting for.
We had Doug Beattie come and talk to us just before you about how we who are pushing for a referendum on constitutional change and why it makes sense. He seems to think that there is no way or mannerisms how he can be convinced to leave the Union. Northern Irish passport holders who may be undecided because they've seen what life is like away from the north of Ireland, what life is like away from the south of Ireland. When we get into the members of the loyalist or unionist communities, who are not undecided, who are just not spoken, they're not interested. What conversation willing to listen?
Well, the first thing is we have to be clear, Billy, that the mutual respect and parity of esteem means total respect for the fact that people believe in maintaining the union and want the union with Britain, and there will be many people in this society who will not be persuaded of the case for change, and that's part of what it means to live in a place like this, to accept that. But those making the case for change need to create a warm and welcoming space. It needs to be a spirit of invitation, so that people who do want to come into the conversation and listen are very welcome and are safe when they do so. And that's not necessarily always been the case here. Like, one of the things I notice around whether it's a university or beyond the university, more and more people from a small unionist and Protestant background are feeling more comfortable to have these sorts of conversations, and that's a brilliant thing. But for those who, quite understandably, you know, they're unionist loyalists, they're not going to be persuaded, and they'll be trying to persuade the other way around. And you have to respect that completely. What those of us who believe in constitutional change need to do, however, is to set out very, very clearly what the guarantees, insurances are that will be in place that make sure that even those people who vote against constitutional change will be safe, secure, and welcome. Their identity will be respected. They'll be accommodated fully. There will be guarantees and assurances in the event of a united Ireland. And I think the way to do that is not just warm words in a manifesto or a programme. Like, we need to spell out in very, very detailed ways the legal guarantees that people will have, you know, in the Irish Constitution, in Irish law, policy and practice. Even people who vote against the referendum are part of making a success of a united Ireland. Also, we need to underline, like the earlier point about the agreement, there are already quite a lot of protections there in the agreement now, and they will carry forward into United Ireland, like the right to be British or Irish or both, accepted and be identified in those ways. And I think we need to just keep raising awareness of those assurances.
Well, Colin, I don't want to keep you too long. You
No.
obviously have a very
Yeah.
important role
Yeah.
in educating minds in the north of Ireland. But
Yeah.
as I said before,
Yeah.
coming from the diaspora's point of view
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
conversations I've been having since
Yeah.
doing this, we've both had Republican views, loyalist views. We've had very diplomatic views, and
Yeah.
then we've had non-political
Yeah.
views.
Yeah. Yeah.
People who are still
Yeah.
looking for something to help them understand.
Yeah.
It's the one thing that they can either watch, read, or listen to that can help them use that as a base or a starting point. Where if I wanted to learn more about constitutional change, referendum, what's the first thing I should do?
That's a really, really interesting question, in terms of, like, one thing I would say is, and this will sound a very basic point to make, the Good Friday Agreement is quite a short document, Billy, and it's got a section early on constitutional issues. I don't think people read that enough. It's not complicated. It sets out the choice that people have here, the options between the union with Britain and the language of the agreement as a sovereign United Ireland. So I would encourage people to read that document. But a broader point, and I would say this anyway, I've been involved with many others. It's very much a collective discussion in the work of Ireland's future. I think one of the things that Ireland's future doesn't really get enough credit for, and I would say this anyway, is that it's produced a range of what I think are reasonably accessible documents on its website under publications that try to walk people through the process. The most recent document that we've produced, the Ireland 2030 document, tries to use deliberately accessible language. We've put out a time frame, we've put dates around all of that to try and set out in clear and basic terms what this means and where it might go next. So I would thoroughly recommend that. Also, that Ireland's Future has done a whole range of events. And at those events, I've really enjoyed listening to a range of perspectives. Again, that doesn't really get the attention it deserves. So I would recommend engaging with some of the material that Ireland's Future has written and done. Now, for those who are into their, academic scholarly work, there's the Orange Project, which is the Royal Irish Academy project with Notre Dame University in the US that's produced, huge amount of very detailed, footnote-laden academic articles about all of this as well that I'd recommend. And I've done a number of reports a bit like that, and I've written for Orange as well. That's on my website. That's all open access that people can read. But I think the two things I would, just to repeat, I think actually getting this recognized as a normal, uncontroversial Good Friday Agreement conversation. So encourage people to have a look at that document and what I think is the accessible language that's used there. And then maybe have a look at some of the material that Ireland's Future's produced, the Ireland 2030 document, a number of the other documents that we've produced, policy documents that are consciously written. If you look at the way we write our documents, we ask a question and then we answer it. And part of the reason for doing that is to try and make that as accessible to people as we can. But one of the problems, Billy, that our conversation has identified is, I think, that the Irish government at the moment is not on the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
It's not engaging in this preparatory work. And I think that's a big problem. And that's why so many people at the moment are working very, very hard. You'll know that there are programme for government negotiations about to happen on this island, or are happening, is to get the next Irish government to commit to taking forward a number of initiatives, whether that's a much more ambitious shared island agenda through the Shared Island Unit, a minister or a department with specific responsibility, a green paper on this, or putting in place this All Ireland Citizens Assembly or Civic Forum or New Ireland Forum. I don't care what you call it, but something that involves people. I think the Oireachtas also has a role. Ourselves and others have called for the establishment of a joint Oireachtas committee. But really, now that the election is out of the way, I think a lot of people are looking to the next Irish government to get involved, to be on the pitch, to in a sense stop putting its head in the sand and to engage. Now, welcome the Shared Island Initiative and all the brilliant work that's doing, but just now encouraging the Irish government to take the next step. Because why would any British government do this if the Irish government isn't asking? And my view on that is that global Ireland, however you want to describe it, the diaspora has an absolutely massive role in all of that, both in asking the question, doing the letter writing and all of that, but actually getting together, forming groups, the work that you're doing to begin to think, this is the sort of Ireland that I would love to see emerge at the end of this, so that many, many people then, to be candid, aren't forced to leave the island, because their basic social and economic rights, for example, aren't respected. I'd recommend it.
Well, I'll leave it at that then, and I'll not take too much more of your time. Thank you very much for all the insights and simplification of what we've been searching for as a diaspora abroad. Okay. And no doubt I'll probably have more questions for you down the line.
Yeah, and like one of the things, Billy, I'd like to say, just thank you so much for the invitation to speak to you. But hopefully none of this is a one-off, event. I'm still here. Many people are involved in this discussion, are keen to stay engaged with yourself and others to make sure that people are listening as well, around what, if we do move into a phase where proposals begin to emerge, you just want to make sure that you get those right. And the only way to do that is to listen to people, not just on the island of Ireland, but around the world as well. So hopefully this is only the start of our conversation.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Professor Colin Harvey for all his time, Ireland's future, and everything that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Billy. Thank you.